We all know the Islanders need to make some moves, and we all know about their cap problems. So what if they added two less expensive players rather than one really expensive player to solve their scoring woes? We'll take a look at some possibilities today. All that and more on today's Locked On Islanders podcast.
You're Locked On Islanders, your daily podcast on the New York Islanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to the Tuesday edition of the Locked On Islanders podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On Islanders your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you can get new episodes as soon as they drop. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. We have got a busy show today, but first, if there's something Islanders related on your mind, if you have a question, a comment, maybe a topic you'd like us to discuss on a future episode, email us at lockedonislanders@gmail.com. And if you leave your first name and where you're from, we're happy to mention you on the show when we talk about whatever's on your mind. You can also follow the show on X at Locked On Isles, and you can follow me, Gil Martin, on X at Ice Wars, NYR, VSNYI. We'll keep you up to date on all things Islanders all year long. In the offseason, that means hirings, firings, trade rumors, free agency, the draft. You name it, if it's happening to the New York Islanders, we'll have it covered for you here on the Locked On Islanders podcast. And of course, it's always great to talk a little Islanders hockey with you, game time or anytime. So I wanted to start today's show off with an email from a listener, and our friend Christopher from the Bronx poses a question. Hi, Gil. I'd like to hear a response from you about cap space, because you sure mentioned it a lot. I have two questions, actually. Number one, why should we as fans care about cap space when it has nothing to do with us and it's an organization problem, not a fan problem? Two, if we're that low on cap space, why not just take out loans? Who cares what the NHL board says? You have to bend the rules a little bit to win championships. Boston did it. They never had to rebuild. Well, Christopher, first of all, thank you for the email. Always great to hear from listeners. And again, it's lockedonislanders@gmail.com if you have a question. And I guess I'll answer the first question first. And that is this. It is a fan problem, cap space, because if we want the team to get better, they need cap space to make improvements to the roster. And right now, the Islanders have about almost $6.5 million in cap space, actually a little less after the Siplakov signing. And we know this team needs to get younger, faster, and more skilled every day. As you've heard me say that more often than I wish I had to. And you can't get more skilled and bring in good players so easily if you don't have cap space. So, yeah, it doesn't have anything to do with the fans on a day-to-day basis. You know, oh, no, the Islanders don't have cap space. You're not going to necessarily change your day because of that. But if you're an Islanders fan and you want the team to improve their roster, you need the team to have cap space in order to get better players, whether that's in the trade, whether that's in free agency, whether or not that is, through the draft, you need cap space. And Christopher, just to give you an idea of what problems with cap space do to the team, you may remember a few years back, the Islanders traded Devon Taves to the Colorado Avalanche for a couple of second-round draft picks. And a lot of people were not happy about that trade, and understandably so. And Taves in Colorado, took his game to another level, obviously playing with all the talented players offensively on the Avalanche roster didn't hurt. Having Cale Makar there didn't hurt. But the point is, the Islanders lost an important asset, and the reason they lost him was because they didn't have enough cap space to keep him. And it ended up hurting the team. You end up, when your general manager and your owners mismanage the cap, you end up having to part with players you don't want to part with. Or if you look at the Islanders, another recent transaction, a lot of people were thinking the Islanders should have had Josh Bailey be available in the expansion draft rather than Jordan Eberle. They ended up, when Bailey's play fell off after last season, after the 2022-2023 season, they ended up having to trade Bailey and a draft pick, a second-round pick, to the Blackhawks just to get Chicago to take Bailey off their hands, and that freed up just enough cap space for the Islanders to re-sign Scott Mayfield and Pierre Engvall. And again, how you use that cap space determines how good, in many instances, your team can get. So not having enough cap space as a fan problem, it means your team either has to get rid of players you don't want to get rid of, or can't sign players you want to sign. So there's that. Now, as far as taking out loans, it doesn't work that way in the NHL. In the NFL, you can, fool around sometimes with signing bonuses and convert money from a from a performance bonus to a signing bonus, or from salary to a signing bonus, or add void years. There are ways to sort of, finagle the cap and create more short-term space. Eventually, you have to pay, but there are ways. And in the NHL, really the only way to take out loans, Christopher, is LTIR. And that is only if a player is injured enough that, they're going to miss, 10 games or 2 weeks, I believe is the amount, a minimum amount of time. So under the circumstances, the Islanders put Scott Mayfield on LTIR. That freed up a little bit of cap space. They didn't end up using that cap space at the trade deadline, but that move theoretically would have given the Islanders a little bit more cap space to maneuver. They had Adam Pelech on LTIR. That allowed them, among other things, to sign, when they acquired Mike Riley and they acquired Robert Bortuzzo. They had to make room for these players by freeing up some cap space. So you can't take out a loan against future cap, but if there are injuries, you may be able to place players on LTIR and create some temporary cap space as a result of that. And, with regard to teams like Boston and Vegas and Tampa Bay, yeah, they do seem to stay up there in the standings for an extended period of time without rebuilding. But why? They have a good mix of young and veteran players. When older players are getting ready to, retire or slowing down, they have prospects ready to step in and replace them. They also utilize the cap very well. And that's something that Lou Lamoriello has struggled with at different times during his Islanders tenure. And the result is you're trading away Devon Taves and trying to create cap space that way, because you just don't have the room to keep the guys you necessarily want to keep, because you just don't have the cap space. And why? Because there are players on this team, and every day, as you know, I don't have to mention names, but there are players on this team who have a higher cap hit than their productivity. Whether it's, I'll mention 2 names off the top of my head, whether it's J.G. Pageau earning $5 million, or Anders Lee earning $7 million. These guys are not producing at those rates. So, Anders Lee, for $7 million a year, you should be getting more than 20 goals and 37 points in 81 games. For $5 million a year, you should be getting more than 11 goals and 33 points in 82 games from JG Pageau. And look, those two are not alone. They're just the two easiest examples for me to mention off the top of my head. But you get the idea that cap management is important, and it's something that has hurt the Islanders. And Christopher, that's why it's important to have the cap and why fans care about it. It isn't just an organizational problem. I mean, it is primarily an organizational problem, but it affects the quality of the team you put on the ice. And in many ways, the Islanders are Exhibit A for why. We have got a lot more to discuss. We've talked about some trade possibilities or free agent possibilities, and we've talked about Mitch Marner, or even Nikolai Ehlers, guys who are one guy who the Islanders could sign, big ticket, big cost, but make a splash. What if they go the route of bringing in guys who would be paid a little less, but maybe you could sign two of them, depending on how much cap space you create? We'll talk about that. We'll continue our player-by-player look at the Islanders with Adam Pelech. And for our Islanders' birthday of the day, a player who was with the Islanders for most of their first season got traded to help the Islanders acquire a future Hall of Famer and went on to be a Stanley Cup winning coach in the NHL. Let's see if you can guess who that is. We've got all that and a lot more coming up on today's Locked On Islanders podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by your friends at Game Time. Game Time now makes getting NBA Finals tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to the tip-off. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. My favorite feature on Game Time, you go on the Game Time app, and you can see the view from your seat before you purchase the tickets, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. Take the guesswork out of buying NBA Finals tickets with Game Time. All you have to do is download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So how about maybe some smaller moves that the Islanders could make in order to improve this team without breaking the bank? And maybe instead of bringing in one player, you might be able to bring in two. And I think that would be a wiser move for the Islanders under the circumstances. And I'm addressing forwards more than I am defensemen right now in this segment. We know the Islanders need a couple of forwards. They only have right now 4 legitimate top 6 forwards. And if you look at the lineup from the last playoff game, you had in your top 6, Casey Cizikas on the first line, Hudson Fasching on the second line. And I like both those players, don't get me wrong, but they are not ideally top 6 forwards on a good team. They are bottom six, hardworking, blue collar, good bottom six players. Don't get me wrong, but they are ideally not the kind of player you want playing with Bo Horvat and Matthew Barzal and Brock Nelson and Kyle Palmieri on a long-term basis. So you're looking primarily at left wing, and to me, a player who is out there right now, who may be available, who I think could be a good fit, is Anthony Duclair. And there's a connection, okay? Anthony Duclair played for Patrick Waugh in juniors, and that could make him a pretty good fit. He's 28. He'll be 29 in August. And, here's a guy who this past year scored 24 goals and had 42 points despite playing, 56 games on the worst team by record in the NHL in the San Jose Sharks. And then he goes to Tampa Bay and, helps the Lightning late in the season, 8 goals and 15 points in 17 games for the Lightning. He, isn't the biggest guy in the world at 5'11", 197 pounds, but he's solid. And he certainly would bring a little bit more offensive juice to the New York Islanders than what they've got now. And look, let's face it, he earned $3 million a year last season. You could probably get him for $4, maybe $4.5 million instead of paying Mitch Marner $10 or $11 million, or the $6+ million that you would have to pay Nikolai Ehlers. So, I'm just throwing that out there as a possibility. And then another guy who I think might be able to help the Islanders is Jake DeBrusk of the Boston Bruins. And again, these guys in and of themselves are not going to give you that 30, 35 goal scorer that the Islanders probably, really could use. But they just may not have the cap space to do that. And, the thing about DeBrusk, 25 goals in 2021, 2022, 27 goals in just 64 games in 2022, 2023. This year fell down to 19 goals and 40 points. But look, let's face it, 19 goals and 40 points, while not, elite sniper material. Casey Cizikas, 10 goals, 23 points in 70 games. Hudson Fasching, 4 goals and 14 points in 45 games. You add Duclair and DeBrusk, you're upgrading your top 6 without completely breaking the bank. And, right now, DeBrusk, his deal was worth $4 million a year. Again, you give him 4, 4.5, 5 tops for $9 million or $10 million. You could add 2 legitimate top 6 forwards, even though they're far from elite. Give the team a little bit more depth, and maybe if you find chemistry, these guys can produce a little bit more than what they did a year ago. And again, DeBrusk, 27. He'll be 28 in October. You're not talking about a guy who is 33 or 34. And hopefully, Lou isn't going to sign either Duclair or DeBrusk to a 7-year extension with a no-trade clause. Knowing Lou, he probably will, but I'm hoping, quite honestly, that you can get these guys for 5 years or 4 years. And if you have to go the 7-year route, at least keep the salary a little bit lower and don't give them that no-trade clause, or give them a no-trade clause for 2 years and then walk away from it. again, you got to attract these guys. You got to bring them in as free agents. But I think getting two good but not elite top six forwards would make more sense for this team based on their needs and the finances than spending all that money on Mitch Marner and then just calling it a day, because then you can't get the puck moving defenseman. You can't get another forward, and unless you really start shipping some more players out. So those are just two examples. I'm not saying those are the only two players who would fit the description, but I think it's worth thinking about when you have an option to get two good players rather than one very good or elite player, because this team needs more help, I think, than one player can provide. We have got more to get to on today's show. We will continue our player-by-player look at the Islanders from the season that was to what their role will be going forward. Today, Adam Pelech. So we have that, plus our Islanders birthday of the day and more coming up on today's Locked On Islanders podcast. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national coverage, national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. So, we continue our player-by-player look at the Islanders season and future with Adam Pelech. Everydayers, yesterday we did Brock Nelson. We've done Pierre Engvall, Oliver Wahlstrom, Kyle Palmieri, Alexander Romanov, Simon Holmstrom. We've done, 2.5 weeks now worth of players as we examine all of these possibilities and all the players on the roster, and we will continue to break them down one per day until we complete the roster. So Adam Pelech, let's talk a little bit about him. Injuries limited him to 58 games, and he only had one goal this year, 16 points. He was a -2, 27 penalty minutes. Clearly, I don't think he really was healthy the entire year. He only played or averaged 20 minutes and 17 seconds of ice time per game. That's his lowest total since 2018, 2019. Missing, 24 games due to injury doesn't help your cause. And I think those injuries really added up. He did play a little bit better late in the season when he was reunited with Ryan Pollock. I think that was definitely helpful. But overall, I will say this. It is vital for the New York Islanders to get Adam Pelech back to being his old self and playing at the level we saw him play at 2, 3, 4 years ago, when he just seemed to be a shutdown defenseman. 111 block shots. That's one more than he had the previous season in 3 fewer games. 64 hits in 58 games. I think we kind of expect a little more from Adam Pelech in that department. But again, if he's not physically 100%, that certainly could do it. Now, Pelech will turn 30 in August. 6'3", 210. The size is there. He should be more physical. But again, if you're not healthy, that's going to be tough. 5 playoff games, 2 assists in those. I think the Islanders need more from Adam Pelech. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And the fact that he is still signed through the end of the 2028-2029 season tells you that the Islanders, again, when you have 5 more years at $5.75 million. And again, 30 years old now, or by the time the next season gets underway, you need more production and productivity out of Adam Pelech if he is not going to be able to get back to the player he was. Then you got to think at some point about moving either him or Ryan Pelech, but preferably not both. But hopefully it doesn't come to that. Hopefully we see the Adam Pelech of old, because let's face it, the Islanders, their specialty under Barry Trotz and to an extent under Patrick Waugh, who wants to be smart and organized and positionally sound in his own zone. You need Adam Pelech on this roster. Noah Dobson is more offensive minded. Mike Riley is more offensive minded. Sebastian Aho is more offensive minded. Defensive minded, you got Mayfield and Romanov, but you need Pelech and Polak if you want this team to be successful again. Let's see if he can do it. I expect him to be a top pair defenseman again this year, at least, a shutdown defensive defenseman, but they need him to get back to where he was, or this team is in trouble. Time now for our Islanders birthday of the day. And, today is the 81st birthday of former Islanders forward Terry Crisp. Crisp, born in Parry Sound, Ontario, also the birthplace of one Bobby Orr, 5'10", 170 in his playing days. Was not drafted, but made his NHL debut playing 3 games for the Boston Bruins in 1965-66. So Crisp was good enough to at least make an appearance in the NHL in the waning days of the original 6. Became a full-time NHLer with the St. Louis Blues, and then joined the Islanders in the expansion draft in 72-73. Played 54 games for the Isles, had 4 goals, 20 points, 6 penalty minutes, and was a minus 23 plus minus, which on the 72-73 Islanders was good. He was traded at the deadline for Jean Potvin with the idea that the Islanders would have Jean Potvin to entice Dennis Potvin, who they knew was going to be the number 1 pick in the draft the following year, to sign with the Islanders and not with the WHA. By the way, that was a win-win. The Islanders did manage to get some production from Jean Potvin. They signed Dennis Potvin, while Terry Crisp went on to win 2 Stanley Cups with the Flyers in 1974 and 1975. In 1989, Crisp coached the Calgary Flames to a Stanley Cup championship. One of his better games as an Islander, December 30th, 1972, at the Pacific Coliseum in Vancouver. Islanders and Canucks. Billy Smith, the Islanders goalie, Dunk Wilson, the goalie for Vancouver. And in this game, with the Islanders trailing 1-0, our Islanders birthday of the day, Terry Crisp sets up a goal by Craig Cameron to tie the game at 1. Lorne Henning, the secondary assist. And then in the third period, with the Islanders trailing by a score of 4-1, Crisp scores his 3rd of the year. Lorne Henning and Craig Cameron with the helpers. Islanders lose it 5-2. But Terry Crisp, our Islanders birthday of the day, a goal, an assist. He was a +2, and he had 4 shots on goal for the Islanders. So Terry Crisp, Stanley Cup winning coach, 2 Stanley Cup wins as a player, and an original New York Islander. He is our Islanders birthday of the day. Thanks again for making Locked On Islanders your first listen every day. Every day is tomorrow on the show. In addition to the latest Islanders news, notes, and happenings, we continue our player-by-player look at the team with Cal Clutterbuck. How was his season this past year, and does Clutter have a future with the New York Islanders? We'll have all of that and more on tomorrow's show. Until then, stay safe, everybody. Have a great day. And of course, let's go Islanders.